Disclosure: this video was sponsored by the real-time strategy game Man of War 2. If you want to support the channel, check out the link in the description. Today we take a look at Panzerschreck Tactics based on German World War II manuals. And we'll see how they work in Man of War 2, which will be released in the upcoming days. First off, some basic information about the Panzerschreck or tank terror in English. It was also called Ofenrohr, which means stovepipe. The official designation was although a bit different, to quote the manual from 1943. What is the 8.8 cm rocket-propelled anti-tank rifle 54? A recoilless handheld weapon designed to engage all tanks, including the heaviest, up to a range of 150 meters. The weapon is fired electrically. The Panzerschreck was a reusable weapon that could be reloaded, unlike its smaller cousin, the Panzerfaust. The manual is specifically noted that the rocket should only be used against tanks, since the fragmentation effect was low. So how did the warhead work? Well, glad you asked. Although there are differences to the Panzerfaust, the general function of the two warheads was the same. The penetration is achieved with the called Monroe or Neumann effect. So how does this effect work? Here you can see the Panzerfaust warhead. Such a warhead is generally called a hollow charge or a shaped charge. As you can see, both make sense. The charge is both hollow and shaped. So when the warhead impacts, the impact fuse sets off the booster charge. This then leads to a detonation of the explosive charge, which focuses the explosion and deforms the warhead's conical metal liner into a high velocity jet. This jet is so fast that it penetrates the armor. Be aware that it does not burn through, a common misconception and an error that I made myself in the past. Since this is a non-kinetic penetration, the penetration values are not dependent on the speed of the warhead, which also means that they are independent of the range to the target. So what are the main differences between the Panzerfaust and the Panzerschreck? Well, first off, you can clearly see the size difference. This was also reflected in terms of weight. A Panzerfaust 100 weighed about 6.8 kg or 15 pounds, whereas the weight of a Panzerschreck was 9.4 kg or 20.7 pounds for the shortened version. Second, there were more versions of the Panzerfaust, as you can see, whereas the Panzerschreck was only modified. There were two main modifications of the Panzerschreck. One was the addition of a shield to protect the gunner from the backblast of the projectile. Both weapons had a dangerous backblast from the barrel, but only the Panzerschreck had a backblast from the projectile. The other modification was the shortening of the barrel. Another difference was that the Panzerfaust was disposable, whereas the Panzerschreck wasn't. The lifetime of a Panzerschreck barrel was, depending on the source, 300 or 1000 shots fired. In terms of operation, the Panzerfaust was used by a single operator, whereas the Panzerschreck was operated by a gunner and a loader. The Panzerfaust, except with the late war versions, had less effective range than the Panzerschreck. When it came to penetration, the penetration of the Panzerfaust 100 was around 200 mm versus 160 for the Panzerschreck. This is due to the fact that the caliber of the Panzerfaust was substantially larger. Keep in mind that 160 mm is still quite substantial. For the ammo, the obvious difference was that the Panzerschreck could be reloaded. The less obvious difference is that there was a winter and summer ammunition for the Panzerschreck to prevent the warhead exploding in the barrel if it was too hot, but also to reduce the dispersion during winter. Probably the most important and interesting differences are in terms of organization and employment. First off, the Panzerfaust was considered to be ammunition, like a hand grenade. As such, it did not show up in the tables of organization and equipment, whereas the Panzerschreck was considered a weapon and as such showed up in such tables. Thank you to Dr. Niehorster for this information. Second, the Panzerfaust was like Quake, so for everyone, including kids and the elderly. This is also reflected by the fact that the manual was printed on the weapon itself. This is in contrast to the Panzerschreck, which was intended for specialists. To quote from the guidelines on close anti-tank combat, training on the rocket anti-tank Panzerschreck is limited to specially designated soldiers, see number 9. Since the Panzerschrecks were also used in dedicated units, it was far less common than the Panzerfaust. Since we got the basics down, let us look at how the Panzerschreck was to be used. As previously mentioned, the Panzerschreck was not handed to everyone. It was used in dedicated units that also received more specialized training. One of these units was the Panzer-Zerstörer-Bataillonen, so Tank Destroyer Battalion. This sounds quite impressive, but it was just a bunch of riflemen with Panzerschrecks, small arms, and horses. The battalion was organized into a headquarters unit and 3 companies. Each of those companies consisted of 3 platoons. The platoon consisted of a platoon headquarters with an MG section and 3 tank destroyer squads, Panzer-Zerstörer-Gruppen. A tank destroyer squad consisted of a squad leader, a horse leader, 2 sections with 6 men each operating 3 Panzerschreck teams. Here you can see 3 Panzerschreck teams in Man of War 2. As you can see, each team consists of 2 men for each Panzerschreck, 1 gunner and 1 loader. Be aware that the in-game unit for gameplay is not historically accurate and uses 2 Panzerschrecks for 2 men. In terms of equipment, the loaders had a rifle or a submachine gun, whereas the Panzerschreck gunners had a pistol. Additionally, it was mentioned that the tank destroyer squad should be equipped if possible with the following: 1 rifle grenade device, up to 20 dedicated smoke grenades, up to 5 Panzerfäuste or adhesive hollow charges, smoke hand grenades, these were the smoke variants of the regular hand grenades, and other close combat anti-tank weapons. So the regular tools of the anti-tank infantry equipment from early and mid-war. It seems the axe from the early war instructions had been discarded. If you want to know more about the axe, see this video. Let us look at the defensive position out of the manual for a Panzerschreck section that consists of 3 Panzerschreck teams. Here you can see a portion of the trenches. Since the effective range was about 150 meters, 3 teams should be positioned in a triangle that have at least partially overlapping arcs of fire to support each other and allow to flank the enemy. For this, it was important the positions should allow to fire into all directions. Additionally, it is mentioned that the position should allow the loader to be as close as possible to the gunner, while at the same time have a position that protects him from the backblast. There was also a figure that showed specifically enemy tanks in the trench system and how they should be engaged. As you can see, the tanks are ideally engaged from the side at close range, not from a maximum distance. Here you can see how the overlapping arcs of fire should work. A pamphlet specifically notes that engaging tanks that drive by from the side increases the chances to destroy that vehicle, since a 90-degree angle is ideal. Now let us set up a similar position in Man of War 2, which allows you to create your own defensive positions and much more. At first, let's build some trenches with our engineers. Let us go for a similar shape like in the manual. Note that in-game the distances are far shorter than in real life, as it would be very hard to manage. So now let us put our Panzerschreck teams into the trenches. Of course, we also need some regular infantry. As the manual stated, the Panzerschreck units were not able to conduct operations alone. The regular infantry ideally deals with the infantry that accompanies the enemy tanks, after they have been dealt with. The tanks are mostly blind, and our Panzerschreck teams should have an easy time. Here the enemy comes. Our infantry engages and ideally pins down the enemy infantry. The enemy tanks attack as well and start coming closer to our lines to push out our regular infantry, but this gets them too close to our Panzerschrecks. In Man of War 2 you can play as Germans, Soviets or Americans and test your skills in several single-player campaigns, featuring 3 story campaigns, 2 historic campaigns and further dynamic campaigns as well. In case you are a competitive player, that flank is covered as well. The game offers multiplayer with over 20 handcrafted maps, 13 game modes for PvP and 5 dedicated PvE game modes. I particularly look forward to the co-op play with up to 4 players, which is available across all single player content. Finally, Man of War 2 comes with full mod support at launch, so you can mod in the early Panzerschreck without a shield if you desire. Now back to the employment of the Panzerschreck units. There were several guidelines for the employment. The Tank Destroyer Battalion served as a high-level reserve. It should be assigned to divisions that were located in areas where tank attacks were likely or where reconnaissance indicated a large-scale enemy attack was likely. The guidelines specifically mentioned that a single battalion should be subordinated only to a single infantry division, and not more to be combat effective. It is also noted about the deployment of the Panzerschreck. In the sector that should be secured, as many Panzerschrecks with mutually overlapping fields of fire are to be used that the entire sector is covered with fire. Use of individual Panzerschrecks can only be considered for staff units, rear services, etc. for protection against individual broken-in enemy tanks. Furthermore, it is noted that these units are not equipped to be used independently. For independent employment, for instance as a combat reserve or for defense of a separate sector, etc., they are not suitable because of the organization and equipment. Now these battalions should be assigned to specific divisions, whereas the individual companies should be distributed to the infantry units of the division. The companies of the tank destroyer battalions are to be divided and placed in one or more squads under the command of the grenadier companies. The platoons and companies are to be kept together as far as possible in this connection or subordinated to adjacent units. It is specifically noted that after the units are allocated, that the tank destroyer battalion, company and platoon leaders don't have any tactical authority anymore. This clearly outlines that these units acted as support. The tank destroyer units leaders' responsibility were to advise, organize the supply and support the troops. In terms of combat principles, the pamphlet notes that generally each team determines independently when it engages in combat. Yet it also contains the following principle. The basic principle for opening fire is cold-blooded waiting until the enemy tank has come to the most effective fighting distance. Surprising opening of fire and rapid succession of fire guarantees success. Premature opening of fire calls into question the chances of scoring a hit, enables the enemy tank to take evasive action, and exposes the crew to the danger of being detected and thus destroyed. Thank you to the real-time strategy game Man of War for sponsoring this video. Be sure to check out their game on Steam, see the link in the description. Thank you to Chris from Military Aviation History for helping me out with the design and editing. Thank you to Andrew for reviewing the script. Thank you for watching and see you next time.